welcome to the Sunday morning services of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Lake Norman. Welcome, everyone is welcome here, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, economic status. We are a liberal faith, open community, and we follow different paths to find our way to truth. However, we are committed to the belief in the dignity and worth of the individual. And we are committed to expressing our faith in acts of kindness, compassion, and justice. So thank you for being with us today. I want to light our candle, but first I want to tell you I have been a member of the community for a year and a half. My name is Elaine. We light this candle as a representation of our search for truth. In our search for truth, may we show compassion and loving. And in our search for justice, may we be kind. Today, we have with us Pat Jobe, our new minister of only a couple of months. And he's going to be talking to us about Unitarians and Universalists and the differences between them and how they joined up to make our current congregation. So thank you, Pat Jobe, for your words of enlightenment and history. And after he speaks, we are going to have a contemplative, meditative, beautiful song by our Mike Alicki. Thank you, Mike. And I'll talk to you a little bit later about some of our activities and what we're up to. So here's Pat Jobe.
So much of who we are and what we do as a religion is given to us by white men of the 19th century. Listen to this pretty thick quote from Hosea Ballou, one of the most famous Universalists of olden days. It is well known and will be acknowledged by every candid person that the human heart is capable of becoming soft or hard, kind or unkind, merciful or unmerciful by education and habit. On this principle, we contend that the infernal torments, he's talking about hellfire and damnation, the infernal torments which false religion has placed in the future world, and which ministers have with an overflowing zeal so constantly held up to the people, and urged with all their learning and eloquence, have tended so to harden the hearts of the professors of this religion. They have exercised toward their fellow creatures a spirit of enmity, which but too well corresponds with the relentless cruelty of their doctrine and the wrath which they have imagined to exist in our Heavenly Father. By having such an example constantly before their eyes, they have become so transformed into its image, that whenever they have had the power, they have actually executed a vengeance on men and women which evinced that the cruelty of their doctrine had overcome the native kindness and compassion of the human heart. That's sort of a thick as a brick quote from Hosea Ballou, and its thickness comes in part from its 19th century style. I sent it to Regina to publish in the newsletter so you could see it before you heard it. I hope some of you did see it first. Isn't it wonderful that Ballou believed kindness and compassion were native to the human heart? That's pretty cool. Who can argue against his contention that the lie of God's cruelty might create similar cruelty in the human heart. After mulling the lie of hell for nearly 50 years, it is so clear to me that human cruelty might well base its tortures and attacks in a belief in a literal, deep, fat fryer of hellfire and damnation. I know a couple who were very cruel to their children, berated them, nagged them, constantly assessed everything they did in terms of whether it was right or wrong. I knew from listening to them that these two people definitely believed it was possible to die and go to a literal hell of fire and torture. They tortured their children out of a fear that if they lived the wrong kind of life, they would end up in that literal afterlife, hell. Some of you may have been raised that way, had to walk on eggshells, because you never knew when the next attack might be launched. Never could relax in your own skin because either a verbal or a physical or even a sexual attack might be right around the next corner. That's hell. That's hell that doesn't have to wait for the afterlife. It's a daily or sometimes hourly hell that penetrates deeply into every cell of our bodies and leaves us hungry for some good news. Even some calm waters, gentle breezes to make us happy to be alive. There's a story from Africa where a young boy goes to his grandmother and says, "Grandmother, why do people always say, 'Be like the moon, be like the moon'?" Grandmother said, "Well, son, think about the sun. The sun is so hot. The sun is always forcing people into the shade. Get away from the sun. It's too hot. Don't be like the sun. Think about the wind. The wind, it cuts us to the bone when it is blowing too hard. It can cut right through our clothes. The wind is too cold. Don't be like the wind." But the moon, everybody loves the moon. Be like the moon. Be like the moon. For children who have survived abuse, being like the moon feels like a distant dream. Yet the history of Christian universalism is that gentle moon. We don't have to hide from the message of its heat or the fierce wind that might cut us to the bone. Christian universalism holds to all the old myths about Jesus. He could turn water into wine, which went over really well with the people who were hosting that wedding. He could rise from the dead. He could bring other people back to life, much as defibrillators do today. But he did not die on a cross to send sinners to hell. He died on the cross and rose the third day to get everybody into that paradise he spoke of with the thief on the cross beside him. Everybody. That is the message of Christian universalism. Everybody makes it across the river and lives forever in eternal bliss. Other world religions also reject eternal damnation. Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, none of that crowd has any use for the flames of torture that outlast the warranty on a Rolls Royce. It is a theology that is unique to Catholics, Protestants, and Muslims. Although it is not true of all Catholics, Protestants, and Muslims, those who do believe in eternal damnation also believe an awful lot of people are going there. Mark Twain said he once heard a minister reduce the elect to a crowd so small they were hardly worth saving. The question that prompted this sermon is simply this: what was the difference? Who were they, and why, until 1961, were they organized as two entirely different sects? Contrast Hosea Ballou and William Ellery Channing. The former, the Universalist, was mostly all heart. The latter, the Unitarian, was very brainy. Ballou was self-educated. Channing went to college. Ballou's congregations were mostly working-class farmers and shopkeepers. Channing's congregations included more wealthy and well-educated people. Of course, the two most famous Unitarians, the two you often hear referred to in our services, are Emerson and Thoreau. But the galaxy of 19th century stars includes Louisa May Alcott, Clara Barton, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Walt Whitman. And that crowd hung out with more movers and shakers like William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass, two of the lions of the abolitionist movement. The Universalists were not so active socially, although their preaching of universal love must have been some consolation to those who would buy what they were selling. And the theology of the two went down separate roads that eventually evolved today to the point that even atheists and agnostics are welcome in Unitarian Universalist congregations like ours. Universalists remained invested in the myths of Jesus, the miracles and the resurrection, to name only two. The Unitarians gave up the idea that Jesus had to be a God in order to raise himself from the dead. But there's a critical point I make with the backing of some solid scholarship. Prior to the modern age, almost everybody attributed everything to God or some system of mythology. One of my seminary professors argued that the objective history was invented by Edward Gibbon when he wrote The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. Prior to that, all story, all biography, all news, most writing had a point of view. If you tried to argue that the Christian Gospels or the Hebrew texts or the Bhagavad Gita were not objective history, nobody would have known what you were talking about. Nobody worried about whether it actually happened. Nobody asked that question. Bible stories, Hindu myths, Buddhist legends, all of it was assumed to be true at the level of teaching life lessons. Not until liberal scholars began to comment on the possibility of historical accuracy in the 19th century, and surely Channing has to get some credit for this, did anybody ask whether something actually happened. Most of life was mythological. It rained because it was the will of God. People died, wars were fought, crops failed, your husband ran off with another woman, because either God or the devil was in the midst of it all. Science, psychology, logic were all late to the game. Fundamentalism is the idea that Jonah in the belly of a fish or Adam and Eve leaving the garden were historical facts that could have been printed in the newspaper if newspapers had existed back then. Fundamentalism was not invented until the 1890s, in a reaction to liberal theologies that came out of thinkers, writers, and preachers like William Ellery Channing. So there were major differences between the two groups, both in class and education and in theology. Today, most UUs are more Unitarian than they are Universalist. But almost all of us reject the idea of hellfire and damnation as even a possibility beyond the grave. It's bad theology, bad karma, has ruined many lives, as those I alluded to earlier. That makes us very Universalist. But by being Unitarian, we ask people to think about the ultimate forces in life in non-mythological terms. My own personal journey has involved a belief in Santa Claus. My mother told me when I was 8 years old that when you quit believing, he quits coming. So I have never quit believing, and he has never quit coming. It beats the heck out of me when people struggle with that one, but perhaps some of you do. If so, I assume you will be tolerant of our differences. One of the great tensions in our congregations comes when people suddenly realize that they are in a group that includes crazy people. I've heard it said you cannot be a Christian and be a UU. I reject that categorically. But as you will hear 2 weeks from now, Sam Harris argues that you cannot be a Christian and be a sane person. I have heard it said you cannot be an atheist or an agnostic and be a UU, even though This position is touted in one of Forrest Church's books, and he is considered a vaulted authority among UUs. I don't think that's true. I think you certainly can be an atheist or an agnostic and be a UU. Each of you likely knows such people, and many of you embrace this path. And finally, I've heard it said that you cannot believe in astrology and be a UU. That feels a little bit too judgmental to me as well. So how do we get beyond the rejection of eternal damnation as a theology that can create horrible judgment and violence, and simply asking that most of what passes for truth in all world religions has its roots in mythology? This is how we get past that point. We find the common threads in social action. If you get tired of my talking about this, please let me know. Isn't it striking that these free spirits of the 19th century, many of whom I've already named, did not worry so much about heaven or hell, but worked in the fields of social action to end slavery, win rights for women, organize unions, and defend the rights of all people? Isn't it striking that what passed today as so many good things we take for granted once required the hard work and organizing prowess of our UU ancestors? To put it in even harsher terms, look at how slavery, the oppression of women, the rights of capital over labor, child labor, manifest destiny, Jim Crow tyranny, black laws in the South, convict leasing, many more institutions of foul play were defended from the pulpits of other churches, while our ministers and congregations were on the front lines of resistance. And it has always been controversial, even in our own congregations. When the president of the Unitarian and Universalist Association opposed the invasion of Iraq, many people across the country bristled and said the president of the UUA does not speak for me. Full equality for LGBTQ community has been among our recent hallmarks, and yet we have lost members over it and been criticized by others who are not sure this is a right course. Our current pursuit of black allies, so we can be even more serious about racial justice, are sometimes met with white people who want to know what the problem is. Race remains one of the enduring bastions of unfairness, and yet we have people among us who don't believe that, understand that, or embrace that. Despite our differences, despite our tendency to argue over everything, we remain along the cutting edge of social change, and have mercy on our souls if we ever do not. Many people leave us behind because we are either too liberal or not liberal enough. Still, the heirs to Channing's intellectual mind and Ballew's gracious heart are here among us. And we do well every time we gather, whether it is virtually on our website or maybe at a picnic. I want to close with one of the most famous stories of Hosea Ballew. He was approached by a man whose son had a terrible drinking problem. The man said he feared his son was doomed to eternal damnation. Ballew challenged the man. He said, "Let's go to your son's favorite tavern tonight and build a big bonfire in the yard. And when your drunk son comes out of the tavern, let's throw him on the bonfire." The man said, "I can't do that. He's my son. I love him." Ballew said, "Your heavenly Father won't do it either." That's who we are. We may not all believe in life after death, but we all reject hellfire and damnation as even the slightest possibility. We know it has no basis in the Christian text and actually makes no sense if there's anything over there on the other side at all. We think, we reason, we examine mythological language and understand the power it has to create justice and fairness in a world that is unjust and unfair. We take deep breaths of our common loves and passions and desires to do the right thing despite our occasional disagreements with each other. So take one of those deep breaths right now. May our tribe increase, and even if it doesn't, may we keep on these well-worn paths that have come from those who have gone before.
Good morning, everyone. This is a song called Nothing in Your Way. You can see it everywhere. Something's changing, magic in the air. The furthest star from sight, blazing through the sky to fire up the night. It's a chance you've waited for, come once in a lifetime. Hiding behind the door, set it free. Yeah, take it, reach out and turn it all around. You can make it, moment sure is waiting to be found. There's nothing in your way. Feel it everywhere. Ooh, love so real, your heartaches disappear to the life that you once knew, and tears that you cried come rainbows just for you, and the hopes that you once dreamed, they're better than they seem. As the highways open wide, hearts collide. So take it, reach out and turn it all around. You can make it, the moment sure is waiting to be found. There's nothing in your way. Ooh, nothing in your way. Nothing in your way. Take it easy.
Pat, thank you so much for your words. I didn't know very much about the differences between Unitarians and Universalists, but I am definitely enlightened, and I hope the rest of the congregation feels the same way. Mike, thank you so much. We always enjoy hearing your music. It's so nice and puts us in a really good mood for after the services. So I wanted to bring to the attention of those who are new here that there is going to be a little note at the bottom of the screen, and if you're interested in getting further information about our congregation or the faith or whatever, you can contact Linda Heidenberg, and her name is down there somewhere on the screen. Please get in contact with her. And to our current members, please keep up your pledges. We appreciate it. And we are so looking forward to starting anew without COVID, and we want to be prepared for that. So thank you all. And also, please go in peace and be prepared for a beautiful day.